Welcome to Brookline Hub In-Depth. I'm your host, Harvey Bravman, and I'm here with Kim Kushner of Brookline Thrives. Welcome to the show, Kim.
Thanks so much, Harvey. I appreciate having me.
We're going to spend some important time talking about Brookline Thrives, but give us the lowdown on you, Kim. Tell us.
Well, that's one. I make a lot of goofy faces.
There you go. But how did those goofy faces end up becoming part of Brookline Thrives? So tell us a little about you and then a little about how you came to this organization.
Okay. Well, I've always been a mom who's always been really involved in my kids' schools, and was fortunate enough for years to be a stay-at-home parent. And so when I moved to Brookline in 2012, what I realized I really wanted to do was be involved, but not be so involved in my kids' own classrooms or own school per se, but a bigger picture. So first, got involved with the Brookline Education Foundation and was learning my way through Brookline. And then there was the ill-fated 2016 presidential election, and all of us having this moment of crisis of what are we doing in this world type of thing. And started volunteering with the Brookline Food Pantry. And around that same time, my husband's involved with a charter school, and they have a similar program. And I had never heard of a weekend. Excuse me, my cat's now joining the Zoom. Say hello to Lexington. I think that'll get edited out.
Maybe not.
That's part of who I am too. So I went to one of their fundraisers, and I had never heard of a weekend food program. Was absolutely floored by the simplicity of, we've identified a problem and we have a solution, and it's not ending hunger or food insecurity per se, but it's addressing directly our community without creating hoops and red tape for parents or caregivers to get through. Let's just streamline this thing. And I loved it. And I went home and I thought about it. This was towards the end of the 2016-2017 school year, and kept thinking about it. And I looked at my husband at the start of the next school year and said, I'm doing this. And he's like, really? In Brookline? I'm like, I think why? Because everybody has a response. Really? In Brookline, do we need this? And having volunteered at the pantry, realizing there's so many people didn't even realize that our town has a food pantry, even needs a food pantry. And this is all pre-pandemic. So, literally just started doing research and came to find out that these programs exist nationwide, more often than not in more impoverished communities, more communities of color, low income, higher populations on free and reduced meals. So again, really, Brookline? And I kept saying, that's why, because we're kind of ignoring a really substantial part of our population. And, maybe we don't have 80% of our kids on free and reduced meals, at least in that time we had 14%. To me, that's still one kid too many, right? So did the research. I went straight to the then superintendent of schools, Andrew Bott, cornered him literally as he was walking out of a meeting at Runkle School, and said, I need 30 seconds of your time. And I gave him the elevator pitch and said, do I have your permission to pursue this? And who do I talk to? And he said, yes. And he put me in touch. And it just went from there. And I, worked with people within the district and hit the pavement, talking to a ton of people in town and different agencies, learning, and then said, this is a go. And thankfully, one of the questions I often received when meeting with people was, is this a program in the food pantry? And I'm like, well, I really hadn't thought about that, but that's a good question. And they said, well, we really think it should be. So I went to the food pantry and said, hey, I'm going to do this one way or another, but I want you to know that I'm getting this question quite frequently. And what do you say? And Renee Fjorman was the then executive director, but Elizabeth Bowen was coming in, and you know, thankfully they both also saw, you know, the need in town and believed in the mission and just said, you know, yeah, we're going to find a way to do this. And off we went.
Wow, that's incredible. You know, I've been involved with the Brookline Food Pantry for a long time, and more, I would say 10, 12 years ago when I started getting involved. This, but at the same time, I started the Brookline Youth Awards, and it was, I was the president of the Coolidge Corner Merchants Association at the time. And I remember, you know, the business community really wanting to help out, and there were different things that they were doing, but there was always like a prize connected to the giving. You know, your name would get on a list, or you follow this map, and so much would go to the food pantry and so much would go to prizes for the people who were doing the donating and all of that. And I remember just thinking that, you know, I hadn't done enough, and that if I wanted to start doing something, I didn't want to give any prizes for it. Basically, you give to the food pantry because you've already gotten something.
Yeah.
You already have this level of security that other people in our community don't have. And so what you get is the satisfaction out of giving and nothing else. And what else could you possibly want? And so I got some of the students together that are part of the Brookline Literacy Foundation. And we just went to Target and bought, you know, plastic containers and cut the tops off, and got these Avery labels that just said Brookline Food Pantry. And we put them in local shops, and then we sold tickets to a dinner that ended up being at the Fireplace restaurant when that existed in Washington Square. And we raised, I think, 11,000 one year, 20 something thousand the next year. But it was that feeling like of what do you do now that you know?
That's exactly it. And I would say this to people when I started. So we launched Thrives in September of 2018 at the Lincoln School. That was our very first school. And, you know, we're still there and we're growing, and we'll get into that. But I would have so many conversations with people who would say, I had no idea. I said, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with the fact that you didn't know, but now you do. So what do you do with that? And doing something with that doesn't have to be solving world peace. It means you're telling your neighbor, you're having a conversation around, you know, at home with your own family. You're becoming a more aware and compassionate neighbor. You know, you may not have the financial means to make a donation. You may not yourself be in a position to go even make a food donation. But knowing that these are all threads of our community, of our neighbors, doesn't weaken the fabric of Brookline. It makes us stronger. And so that's really why we put Thrives like right out there as well. Many of these programs kind of do a little, I don't want to call it a backdoor, but it's, you know, kids get shuttled to the nurse's office or the guidance office to get their bags and go. And, you know, we kind of said, well, that's just actually promoting stigma, isn't it? Why don't we just see what this is like? And we started smack in the middle of the lobby in Lincoln, and it was great. It was just great. I really didn't know what to expect. And the first week, the first Friday, I had moms coming up and hugging me, again, pre-COVID. And I feel a little egotistical when I say this, but this was my feeling. The impression I got when I was talking with parents was they felt seen, and somebody was going to spend the time to learn a little bit more and grow this program to meet needs. And then we get through the first school year and we survey participating families. Oh, not actually, we surveyed the whole school, not just people that were taking Thrive bags, kind of like, what did they think of the program? And they were all coming back like, I'm so proud that this is part of my school. This is part of my community. I mean, what more can you ask for?
Let me explain to you what I think Brookline Thrives does, and then you correct me
Okay.
or I missed something. Is it as simple as the students that are part? Is it the students that are part of the free and reduced lunch program who then get food on Fridays to help them get through the weekend? Is it just any student that signs up for the program, no questions asked, gets help?
Yeah,
with food through
it's the
weekend?
latter. And, pre-COVID, most schools, students didn't even have to sign up. It depended on the school and what the individual school, how they wanted to handle it in terms of, parents or caregivers coming into the buildings during drop off and pickup. So some schools, we just had general pickup areas, and others, kids had to be registered because the bags were then handed directly to them because parents weren't coming in or out of the building. It's not tied to any financial requirements. It's not tied to free and reduced meals. It really is any family that could benefit from additional food options over the weekend can participate in the program. Food insecurity is not solely tied to economics. There are so many dynamics that happen in a household that can make it difficult for children to get adequate access to food during the day. And so while I know our bags aren't perfect, we try to be a well-balanced bag and everything is in a single serve form. And we hear time and time again from families that that is what works for them, because then their kids can actually take ownership of fixing their breakfast or fixing their lunch and getting their snacks. So yeah, we have no financial qualifications.
The idea I was getting when you were talking about this and explaining how it works is, wouldn't it be great if for some of the families that don't need it, if just as maybe it can go alongside with a donation or something, that we're going to make this donation and we want our kids to get their weekend food that way for a couple of weeks, just to learn what it's like not to have, and just imagine what it would be like if this was their reality every single weekend, and the way they had to think about food, and what a luxury it really is. It shouldn't be a luxury, but it sort of is. If there are people that didn't have it, then having it is a luxury.
Yeah. And I think in some ways we have a little bit of that happening. Always in the beginning of the year, and especially pre-COVID, when we had general pickup locations at schools, we always peaked really fast and then we'd die off as families kind of learned what the program was about. And what kid doesn't want to go grab a bag that they see all these other kids grabbing a bag and all that? And people would ask me, like, aren't you worried about people taking it that don't really need it? I'm like, well, no, because we never put ourselves in a position of trying to qualify who needs it. In fact, I intentionally don't even use the word need, but we never put ourselves in the position of evaluating why someone could, find this to be beneficial at home. My attitude is, if some kids get bags and they're families are like, no, that's not really, we have plenty of food here, but it opens up a conversation, right? And I think that's wonderful. And then, they stop, and the great thing about Thrives is it's very fluid. Families can participate, in and out throughout the school year. There's no cutoff. There's no, you've locked in. It's really about what's going on with your family life. And when does this part of the right decision for you? And when is it not?
Are there enough bags? Are all of the students who need that help to help them get through the weekend, are they all being helped? Or
that is my struggle. I would say it's impossible to answer, are all the kids needing some food assistance over the weekend getting it? I could say guaranteed no. I know we're missing, kids are slipping through the cracks. We every day, every month, every year, we're trying to learn and be better. But we're, for every year that we're in a school, staff becomes that much more comfortable talking about it and advocating with their students and families. And so it gets a little bit better. We always have enough, thankfully, due to the generosity of our community with donations into the food pantry. I have to say Thrives is 100% funded through donations to the Brookline Food Pantry, through monetary donations, and we can discuss why that is. But when I say monetary as opposed to the food donations, but through the generosity of our community, every year when I go to the board and go, well, the budget I gave you last June, well, yeah, we're well past that at this point. And they're like, okay, go for it, because it's there. And we've been able to prove both, quantitatively and qualitatively the positive impact this is making with students.
I know that this is on all of us as a community and as individuals to help the Brookline Food Pantry, so that the Brookline Food Pantry can help Brookline Thrives and their other initiatives and the daily need for food. Do you think it's, trying to figure out how the best way to ask this questions directly, should a town be paying for this?
I get asked that a lot. Oh, in a perfect world, food access would not be considered, would be a basic right that we would all take care of. But we're not in a perfect world. And we know that, everything, funding something comes at the cost of not funding something. So, I don't even know how to answer that one. I mean, the town think that, with the funds that they've been able to get with, COVID relief, grants, and I will speak out of turn because I'm no expert here. Elizabeth Bravman has done an amazing job of advocating and securing funding through, the town's allocations for the pantry. But yeah, I mean, I don't know, we're not in a perfect world. So I'd say, how much do you need? How many steaks can you eat in a day? If you've got an extra nickel, can you give your extra nickel to your neighbor, kind of thing. I think collectively, if we start thinking in that way, we will have a much more equitable society.
I agree with that 100%. So since we don't live in a perfect world, how can people help Brookline Thrives?
Monetary donations and volunteering. I used to get asked, well, it's really funny when I started this and before we officially became a program of the food pantry, and I was figuring out how do I get funding for this. And, I would go to foundations and they're like, yeah. We don't fund programs like yours because they're not sustainable. They live in somebody's, living room until that person decides they're too tired to do it anymore. I'm like, oh, you don't know me. Um, and so, you know, Thrives, we run it like a business. You know, we're definitely part of an established 501c3, and we run it like a business. And I used to get asked all the time, what are my two concerns about sustainability? And I used to say money and people, volunteers. And I used to then say, I'm really not worried about the money, but I'm worried about the volunteers. And then COVID came and everybody volunteered. And now COVID's still here, but everybody's gone back to work and back to school. And so, you know, when we're not kidding, when we put out those emails for both the pantry and for Thrives, that we are short-handed. So yeah, you know, a few hours here or there, if people have it, means a tremendous weight off our shoulders.
I know that the the teens in Brookline, Elizabeth, we had Elizabeth on the show, and
Yeah.
Elizabeth Bone, who's the executive director of the Brookline Food Pantry, and she explained how with the adults, because of COVID, from what we knew at the beginning, the adults were at more risk. So the volunteers basically had to quit, or temporarily.
Yeah.
And then students picked up the slack, and now students are in school. But I guess, is COVID still that issue where people, even if they're back at work, a lot of people are back to work remotely, and they're, if you ask people at the, movie theaters, they're not wanting to go back, and there are people that will go back to these places where we all hang out together, and others that don't feel as comfortable with that. Is that part of the problem in the perception of maybe you're at higher risk if you're, in the presence of lower income people?
I don't think so anymore. We definitely don't have all of our retired volunteers back at the pantry. I mean, yes, people who are older and maybe immunocompromised, they're starting to come back, especially with vaccinations and all of that. Volunteering specifically at the pantry is still a much more physical experience than it used to be pre-COVID. It's hard work. And so not everybody's up to that physical labor. And I can speak firsthand because I help run one of our 3 locations. So that is keeping some of our older volunteers away. I think what's going on right now, at least from my perspective, is a lot of the people who were able to volunteer last year because, they were working remotely or weren't working as many hours. So therefore had a little bit more flexibility in their day and could say, yeah, I can leave for 3 hours and go help out, 1 day a week. They may still be working remotely, but work schedules have picked back up to kind of where they were pre-pandemic. And so cutting out for 3 hours midday isn't happening anymore. And high school, college students are all back. And high school students thankfully have after school activities and jobs now to go to that they didn't have last year. So all those hours that they had free to give us, they're busy doing other things. And hopefully a little bit of being kids safely. As I keep saying to my college student, like, you're being COVID safe, right? While you're doing all this. But yeah, I think that that's really where we're at, is people may not be back to their pre-COVID workplace, but their hours are back to where they used to be.
That makes sense. I know one solution that will require a lot more money, but maybe we could find a way to raise it, is it would be good if all of these volunteers didn't have to be volunteers. Maybe they could be at work for the pantry.
Yeah, I mean, I won't speak for the management of the pantry. That's well beyond, there's so many moving parts. And I know that the pantry's come a long way, even just in terms of having employees since when I started, which was just the one. You know, Elizabeth was the first paid employee in my knowledge. Renee was executive director in title, but was a volunteer. We now have additional employees of various, you know, part-time to full-time. One of my biggest pet peeves is an attitude, you know, from a lot of people thinking that nonprofits, that 100% of that dollar donated should go to just that thing that you're doing. So if it's food, it's food. And that's what's not sustainable, especially in small nonprofits like ours. In order to be able to survive the long haul, you have to have a certain amount of overhead and operational costs. I mean, look, COVID thrust the pantry and Thrives,
Right.
you know, 5 years down into like literally overnight, you know, in terms of our growth and what we were doing. And yeah, I mean, it would be great to have the money and to have more paid employees. I think it's still a wonderful thing to have, and I think you need to have a network of volunteers.
Sure.
But the day-to-day management, I mean, I will be honest, I'm 100% volunteer. I run this as a full-time thing for me, but I'm a volunteer.
Well, I think that's my next editorial. I decided 5 seconds ago is that, you know, the Coolidge Corner Theater has paid staff, and they should.
Mm-hmm.
Brookline Community Foundation paid staff, and they should. Brookline Teen Center paid staff, and they should.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that Brookline Food Pantry, and this isn't, I'm not saying anything that the management is doing wrong. We should all
No.
give more to them. We should provide more to the pantry so that that's an option. And that for people like me and others who, while not being wealthy, you know, we could afford a certain amount of hours for nonprofit ventures.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that if you want to donate your salary back to the food pantry, you can, but you've earned money, and
Yeah.
for something that's important. And you know, unlike the other nonprofits, you know, I mentioned, you know, it's an absolute total necessity. You can't survive without food.
Mm-hmm.
And we got to
Yep.
make sure that people have that. And if enough people can afford to volunteer, then we should pay them. And we
Yeah.
should make sure as a community that it happens.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. And you know, the pantry has definitely grown in its employee status, thankfully, out of necessity. I mean, like I said, COVID thrust a lot into the limelight of necessity. We didn't have to work this hard, you know, before. But, you know, the number of clients served is still 3 to 4 times what we were doing. It hasn't gone down. You know,
I remember when I first was introduced to the food pantry, and I was helping someone that was making a film, and we were showing that film at the Coolidge, and we collected food for the pantry. And I remember just making a phone call and thinking, oh, they'll just come pick up the food. And then at that time, they didn't have, they just didn't have enough to come pick it up. I had to deliver it. And I spent some time there that first day, and got to put my feet a little bit in the shoes of the people that were both volunteering and were there to get food. And you know, it can be a humbling experience. And I think that we just need to do more to help people like you. And I remember back then, we're we're talking like 10, 12 years ago, the food pantry of Brookline didn't have fresh food.
Yeah.
It was all prepackaged, processed food.
Mhm.
It wasn't fresh food. It wasn't built entirely on what a person really needed. Has there been any questions? Are there any questions that I didn't ask you that I should have asked you? Anything more that we think that people should know about Brookline Thrives?
Oh, I mean, oh, that's a hard one. I mean, it's so broad. I mean, anybody who knows me, Harvey, I'll just talk your ear off all day long about Thrives. I mean, but as a point of pride, not as a point of weakness in our town. I have to say, I write a weekly email to everybody who's ever posed an interest in volunteering, or done even 1 hour with me. You're on my list until you beg me to take you off. And in that, so I always give a little update as well as, well, what are the holes we have for the week? And I wrote this morning, quite honestly, that I was in the best mood and still am. I mean, the sun's shining, but we added our 5th K-8 school last week. So we started in the fall of 2018. We expanded to what was then the Coolidge Corner School that spring. So the spring of 2019, ahead of schedule. We kind of thought, like, we're going to go slow. We're just going to do one school, 1 year, and see how it is. And then we'll just rip off the Band-Aid. And I learned 2 things. One school for a year. Obviously, we added 2. And I was really naive when I thought I could just add all the remaining schools in year 2. No idea what was in store for operationally. But then we added Brookline Early Education Foundation, and we added Pierce School, and then we were due to launch at Driscoll School the very Friday. Everything shut down.
Wow.
And so last year we kept all our in-school service for those schools that were already there, but we didn't grow into any more schools because it wasn't appropriate. And so we mobilized. We worked really closely with the Public Schools of Brookline and food services. And I literally drove a van around town on Friday afternoons alongside the school meals bus. It's great. And we had volunteers stationed at various places. But this year, I call it my marathon sprint fall, and we will be in every single one of the K-8s before Thanksgiving. And this makes me so happy because we've I don't want to say proven our worth, but what we've done is we've opened up people's eyes to say, yeah, this makes complete sense in our school community, whether it's 1 student or 50 students. I mean, and it varies. And the fact that we're just rolling in, and it's fantastic.
Wow. You were like lighting me up here. This was for all of those at home. I hear that the show is like hit with the Brookline senior community. So as a typical Brookline senior, I had my gallbladder removed, and one of the incisions got infected. So I've been pretty uncomfortable the last couple of weeks, and you just gave me a boost.
Oh,
So
thanks.
want me to, it's like, forget about that. Go back and doing your work and giving attention to people like him. This is,
it really is uplifting. I got to tell you, I mean, working with volunteers, I'm so happy that we're back able to get inside to school buildings, and that we have some volunteers who are amazing, who have committed to us weekly, and they have been delivering bags to classrooms, and they get the joy of talking with teachers and other staff members who just love the program, whether we've been there for 3 years or it's our very first Friday, and they're caught off guard a little bit, and they're like, oh yes, you're finally here. I will tell you, when we started at Pierce School in the fall of 2019, I had a teacher the very next Monday. So we handed out bags on Friday, and then she stopped me when she saw me and said, I happen to know that a student in my class, is receiving Thrive's bags. And I have to tell you the difference in his behavior on Monday, because he didn't spend a weekend eating processed sugar. And I was floored. It was just one weekend.
Wow. Wow, you're the best.
No, but I believe in what we're doing, and I get teary because it's so incredible, at all layers of it, interacting with the kids and the parents and the volunteers and the amazing staff members at schools. Who couldn't ask for more?
If you're thinking about volunteering, we're going to put some information on the screen. I can tell you from talking to volunteers from a lot of important Brookline nonprofits that you couldn't find happier people. So if you want to make a difference in others, but also make yourself happier, volunteering is the way to go. And Kim, thank you so much. And I don't mean thank you for being on the show. Thank you for doing what you're doing for the community. It's important.
No, you're gonna make me cry again, Harvey, and that's not fair.
That was my intent. Crying is good TV. Did you ever heard that?
Oh, well, thank you. I really appreciate it. I'm always humbled and surprised when somebody wants to talk about, Thrives. And I've thankfully gone from being, well, no, that's not really why I do this, to let me tell you everything because it's so awesome.
I'm gonna thank you for being on, and I'm gonna stop the recording and then we'll talk a little more.
Okay.
But thank you so much.
Thank you very
for being
much.
on. You're awesome.
Hi, my name is Danielle Myers of ADW Video Productions and BrooklineHub.com. BrooklineHub.com is a 501c3 nonprofit online publication dedicated to community building through local reporting and events. Brookline Facing Civil Rights was produced by our founder, Harvey Bravman. The film is about the experiences of African Americans who helped break the wall of segregation that existed in Brookline before the civil rights laws were passed in the 1960s. Last year, the film sold out the Coolidge Corner Theater and included a panel discussion on inclusivity. You can stream the film and the discussion on BrooklineHub.com in exchange for a donation to the Brookline Community Foundation's Safety Net Fund. You can also stream Soul Witness, a film that features interviews with Brookline Holocaust survivors conducted 30 years ago, on soulwitness.org. For the last 11 years, Harvey has been interviewing outstanding teens as part of an event held at the Coolidge called the Brookline Youth Awards. The Brookline Youth Awards are an opportunity for Brookline residents to hear about the character, challenges, and dreams of its young people, as well as adults dedicated to their success through the power and intimacy of video interviews.